The FFP, I don't know if you read about it. Everton had 10-point deduction from the final verdict. But I was thinking to myself, what about City or what about the Big Six? Because, City have pretty much 156 counts or allegations still in court.
Yep. Yeah.
And some people were saying they're just stalling over it, just for people to kind of forget about it. Because guess what? The City, they have money.
Yeah.
And
it does come up. It comes up every couple of, it feels like it comes up every month and a half.
Yeah.
And it gets a really hot debate going. And then it slows down again.
And nothing is done.
They keep stalling. They keep stalling because they have the lawyers and the legal assets to be able to kind of hold this thing off as long as possible.
So I think another thing might be, is it time to probably have a private agency that takes care of things like that, or is it even can the FFP kind of regulate? Even let's say in England where you have something about substantiable or some weird thing. It's kind of the FFP, But in England, are they even big enough to contain these teams? Can they even sue them or take legal action? They probably can't, because these teams are too big. They have money, they have lobbyists, and you think about the whole role even of the FFP. Feel like this just came was just enforced, but in the sense that small teams might never get to be big teams, and big teams will always be big teams as long as we have money,
Especially when a team like Everton made the mistake that they did, and they did make a mistake, and they owned up to it. They said, hey, this was an accident, and I genuinely do believe that. It was an odd balancing of the books. I believe that it was partially due to the Richarlison sale, wasn't it? As opposed to a Manchester City, where I believe what was it? They were asked to see their documents.
Yeah.
They didn't want to give them, and then when they did give them, didn't they give them like 1,000 documents unmarked?
They were accused of cooking the books too.
Yeah. But I remember that there was an article where basically they gave them the paperwork, but they gave them no direction. They just gave them everything they had and said sift through it.
Yeah.
Which legally is kind of that's kind of a middle finger.
Yeah.
Because they know what documents that they're looking for. They know what they've been asked for, but to just give them a bunch of crazy nonsense as a way to just waste their time, that does show a bit of guilt. That shows a bit of manipulation, and so it's a bit. The circumstances are very different. So you have to think, if Everton are going to get punished for this,
what about City
and Chelsea?
Yeah. But we have to think about one thing. There's probably a plethora of questions, but one that comes in my mind, or probably two, is in terms of competition. It's not. There's not a lot of competition for small teams to actually compete with big teams, because if I want to buy a player and you can offer 4 times what I'm offering and never be punished, or because of financial fair play, I can't do that. At what point do we regulate everything for fairness? Because it just makes it a wide talent pool for bigger clubs, and for small clubs, look at Leicester City. You can't tell me you can come in 2015, you win. Now that you won, what's the next step? You probably want to establish yourself as kind of a club where people can, or you want to attract players, but you need the
Bring
money.
Some consistency.
Yeah, you need the money.
It is a cycle. It is a loop. And I mean, the NFL, they see this in a different way.
Yeah.
And college football is the same way as well, where Alabama is a good example of that. You perform well, therefore players want to come. Mm-hmm. And because good players come, you continue to play well.
Yeah.
You continue to play well, more players want to. It's but once you start slacking, it's a cycle that feeds itself, both good and bad. And what the NFL ends up being able to do with that is that there are teams that have statistically more Super Bowls than others. There are teams that haven't won. But you look at teams that are on the rise, it seems like teams go through steady. Each team kind of has time for they come up. Yeah. They fall back down. I don't know how the Ravens are doing right now, but the Ravens were like a consistently strong team in the 2000s.
Yeah.
For the longest time. And then I checked a couple of years ago, and they were like rock bottom of the AFC or something like that. And I was like, wow, that's a shock to me. And then teams like the Eagles that were always known for choking in the playoffs especially, then they get their time to do well. And it's like they seem to work in like 5 to 6 year intervals where they do assemble a really good team, and that allows for more, rights or broadcasting rights, and but they still have salary caps that they can't go over. So it's all about managing the team.
See, yeah,
and creating a mentality and an environment that people want to come to.
Okay.
And then that allows you to continue to prosper. It's not just about throwing money at the highest bid player.
Yeah, and the thing about it, are we entertaining the idea of having salary caps, or are we entertaining the idea of? I mean, there's a lot of ways to go about it, but the thing about FFP, I think, is just it screws up like little teams, because if you can't spend more than what you make, you wouldn't really be. If everybody was at this stage where players will want to come to you just because probably the history of the team, or they feel like they will play best in your system or whatnot, then it will attract a lot of players depending on where players want to go. But if it's all about money, oh heck no, teams like Nice, Toulouse, teams like Wolfsburg, teams like Bayer Leverkusen, they will never get the big players. And guess what? If you have Luka Leicesters, you come in 2015 to buy all your players. Well, you're in that state where with that money you can reinvest, right? You can, but you trying to reinvest and buy players. Then City comes along. Well, guess what? We want to give that player 120 million. You can't give another. As Leicester, you can't give to 120 million to a single player. So it's not fair. You look at Paris Saint-Germain, they are able to afford any player they want.
Anyone.
Well, what it does, if you're not in a strong league, there's a wide discrepancy between the talent and also how competitive the league is. And if you're in England, it also creates this thing where some teams will have the best players and other teams will be struggling with what they can.
So even though those English teams usually struggle less with those top teams than other leagues versus their top team. The bottom of the Spanish table struggle more with Real Madrid and Barcelona than usually. Now this is an interesting season where the bottom half, or the relegation sides in England, they're putting up record low numbers. So barring this one, the league overall is more competitive. In the 20 teams bracket. But I mean, there's something that I do like about the system, and I've been told, not personally, but I guess I've seen enough reporting where they have said that salary caps, for one reason or another, wouldn't facilitate this environment. In Europe, a lot of people would have to agree on a lot of things, and just not. Whereas the NFL and the MLB and the NBA, they're single one-off leagues. Once you get all the teams to agree with that, it becomes a different story.
That's because of all the various leagues and various countries. But at least they should come on with a better regulatory system, because this seems like some sort of lobby where teams set to agree, oh, let's do FFP, and guess what? The little teams will never be big, and if you try to be big, we continue because and if we, even when one thing I have with this day and age is the prices. Some players are too inflated for what they're really worth. And that's because you have big teams that can give all this money. What about the small team? They can't afford that kind of player. Guess what? They wouldn't be competitive.
And I actually had not a debate, but I guess a conversation with my dad about that over the holiday, where it's like, it's not a question of which players are worth $100 million. Because no player is actually worth $100 million. Just because they were paid for like that does not mean that they are worth that. That's just what someone's willing to spend. But that's become the new standard. And you saw it a lot this summer where it was like, but is he a 100-pound player? It's like, no one is. That's what you're not getting. No one's worth that amount of money. You're acting like all of a sudden within the last 2 or 3 years, these players are like double the talent that was there 20 years ago. That's not the case. The inflation has impacted this market, but we're talking about teams and financial agencies that are wealthy beyond recognition. They're choosing. They are not really being hurt by inflation. They're choosing to spend this money. Todd Boehly at Chelsea is choosing to spend that money that way. He can't blame it on, well, the prices of everything went up. It's like, no one's spending that kind of money like you are. It's like, but there is one thing that I do like about the financial system that's been implemented, or at least as like what we are now seeing in Europe, where we use Chelsea and PSG as an example. They have all of that money to spend, but there's really no competitive incentive to go there.
Yeah.
Like they have the money. Money does not always dictate success.
Yeah.
There is no competition for PSG in France, despite them losing every couple of years. But once they play other teams in Europe, they don't go anywhere.
Yeah.
And Chelsea's an absolute mess right now. So there are teams like Liverpool, Manchester City. They have a lot of money, but you have to admit that they spend it much better.
Yeah.
They're pretty staunch at times. They've walked away from certain deals, even though they could have paid for them. Newcastle seems to be moving in that direction as well, where it's like they have the money, but they are on principle not spending it that way.
Yeah. Newcastle is managing their money very well.
Well, and they're not wanting to get in trouble like this.
Yeah.
If they worked that hard to get here and they pumped cash into it to get there, like it's gambling. It's like blackjack, and it's like.
But I want to see
you have to learn to hold certain hands and just be done. You don't have to bet and try to win big every single time.
I want to see if they're gonna in the next 2 or 3 years if they still do that, because one thing with clubs that have money, it's easy for them to say, "Screw it, I'll just buy the best players. I have the money, and if any team try to compete with me, I will double the amount." What you do, you create this whole ecosystem where now players think, "Oh, I'm worth more than what he's offering me." He's offering me. Then players don't even think about, "Oh, I want to play for Dortmund." Even players that had dreams to play for Dortmund, they get to that stage. I just want to play for Real Madrid or PSG.
That's a good question. Do you genuinely think that players consider how much they're worth, or do you think that they consider their value as players? Because there's a different thing. I couldn't imagine personally being in a locker room where someone says, "Well, I was sold for 80 million." I feel like they would be more like the players don't give a shit about that. I don't know. I could be wrong. I know that a lot don't. And they've talked about it where it's not about the value of the player on the market. It's about the value of the player themselves and what they actually can do. I feel like players would be more competitive in terms of their accolades and their actual skill and training, and like sort of
back in the day,
to how much they're worth.
No, back in the days it would have been. But we live. It's a completely new generation. It's like I think Philipp Lahm. I forgot. It's a German player, ex-German player. He said now players are more concerned about what color of boots goes
with their socks and stuff.
Because nowadays it's not about, they don't think about their value as players. They think about their worth and how much you're willing to pay for their service. Right? It don't matter. That's why you have players that will choose to go to a club even though they really did not want to play for that club, because that club is paying X amount of money, and the club they really want to play for is not matching that kind of money. It's like, hey, I would go there for the money, and that's why I think FFP is kind of flawed. So they gotta find.
It's definitely an imperfect system, and I do think that the American rules as well. American sports end up kind of being like a toss up. Like there is something that I do appreciate about how Europe is structured. It's almost like college football, where there are dynasties. The Big Six have been the Big Six Big Five really, for a very, very long time. Like consistently. So certain things are expected out of them and not others. Whereas in the NBA, especially recently, over the last like 15 years or so, it feels like there's a potential 10 out of the 30 teams that could win the championship that year. Every time I look at it now, I'm like, the Bucks? What the fuck? When did that happen? Because when I was growing up, like they were consistently out of the playoffs looking in, or like the Phoenix Suns were that way. You know what I mean? And it's like now it's like every single team is good for like 2 years, and just like there's just kind of a shuffle, and I don't like that. It makes it matter a little bit less. The MLS is that way as well. You look at certain matchups, and aside from looking at literally as simple as possible, well, that's the first place team and that's the third place team, that's going to be a good game. It's like, well, just this season, they weren't in the playoffs last year.
In terms of that, I personally prefer it, because now we don't know who is really who until we see them playing. I
guess.
And it creates more competition, because now everybody is kind of good.
It does.
And in NBA, it's like for me, the recent years just observing is better off in that sense. Like when you see England, and Premier League is kind of that way where Bournemouth can beat City on a good day or on a bad day.
They can, but they'll place lower on the table overall.
In the overall grand scheme, we already know the top six. It's gonna be City, City, Chelsea, or United. Although Chelsea is kind of far back, but this kind of in Spain, same thing. Madrid and Barcelona. Yeah, in fact, if you don't see Madrid and Barcelona in top 3, there's gonna be a problem.
Yeah.
So, where and
I'll flip that for you, because I do see what you're saying, and I do understand why that's enticing for a lot of people. I would make sure I would make it to where it makes this Premier League season even more interesting, because we're so used to Chelsea and United being much higher than they are, that when they do fall, it's like an empire that's crumbled. As opposed to, the Milwaukee Bucks went to the to the Eastern Conference final last year and they didn't make the playoffs this year. It's like, well, they didn't make it for like 8 years in a row, so who gives a shit? It's like it becomes one of those. The MLS, like, I get that Cincinnati is crushing the East. Like, I understand this. How long is that going to happen for? You know what I mean? It's like,
but at least if it happens a year, 2 years, at least there's some sense of
because then like the New England Revolution, they won the Shield last year, which is like the best record, which I think is kind of pointless, because they have the MLS Cup of like who wins the tournament, but then they also have a trophy for just who has the best record, i.e. how every other European league is decided, not through a playoff system. But it's like, they had the best record. Like, they were crushing everybody in the East, and they performed very poorly this year. And who knows, next year maybe they'll be back. And it's just like, it becomes this, I have no idea what to even, like, if you are a fan of that team, you have no idea what the expectation is. I like having an expectation. I like seeing you are projected, because the Premier League projections are usually pretty close in terms of what's expected. Crystal Palace will be around 10 to 12th.
Yeah.
And it gives you more of a reference of what a good season versus a bad season looked like. Because if you're in a conference final and then you miss the playoffs, and then you're back in the playoffs and you miss the playoff, what is a good year? What is a good year?
Well, a good year for me will be unpredictable. Like, we can predict. If I can predict, it's like Spain. I could predict Spain in the next La Liga in the next 10 years. I can tell you Madrid and Barcelona will be top 2 or top 3.
But doesn't that make the Girona thing special this year, though?
That's what I'm saying. If you already know, that's why everybody liked Premier League. It was for that sense. But now it's also moving towards that, because now, I guess, because if you have money, you can do that. But it's moving towards this caste system where if you're not here, you could never be here unless you have the money. Back in the days, like, I could beat you. I could be the first. I think 2015 was the cutoff.
That will never happen again.
That will never happen again.
Because what were the I saw someone actually put out their, like, the actual percentage, like the actual odds of Leicester winning the way that they did, and it was over 1,000 to 1, something like that. Like, it was like, that won't happen again for at least decades.
Because
decades. We probably won't be alive to see that.
You see, for that to happen now in this new age, it means somebody wealthy now bought a team like Bournemouth and started buying players. But if it was just by just sheer will and power on their own players, that would never happen. Because City will technically buy the best players. Chelsea will be, you know what? Let me take this guy from buying. It's like having a team of Avengers every time.
Who trended on Twitter this week? Get him. In January, he's mine. It's like, sir, we have a list of 85 people that have trended on Twitter in the last 5 months. He's like, get him.